So welcome everybody to once again to a BC TEAL webinar session. We are very pleased to have some special guests along with us today. For those who don't know Jennifer and Tanya, I'm just going to do a quick introduction here. Jennifer Walsh-Marr is an academic lecturer in the arts faculty at UBC Vantage College. She has a BA in Applied Linguistics from UVic and MA in Curriculum and Instruction from SFU and 20 years teaching experience. But she says she still gets nervous before every presentation. Jennifer is great. You get to know Jennifer at all. She's a lot of fun to be around. So really great to have you here, Jennifer. And then Tanya. Tanya is a pronunciation specialist, teacher, and teacher mentor and teacher trainer. She's also a treasurer for BC TEAL. Yay! Love having Tanya on the board. She's fantastic on the board. Tanya has a TESOL diploma from VCC and has been teaching for over 14 years and is currently at Van West College in Vancouver. And like I said, Tanya is on the BC TEAL board and served BC TEAL very well in the last few years, especially on the board. And we're extremely lucky to have her. We've been able, I can't keep heads or tails over the budget, so thank you, Tanya. You do a wonderful job there. So the way this session is going to work is I'm going to turn over the presentation. I'll turn off my camera and microphone, and I'll turn everything over to, I believe, Jennifer first. Is that correct? No, Tanya first. Sorry, Tanya. I'll turn this over to Tanya first. That's right. And I'll let Tanya take it over from there. But I said, again, if you have any questions, just type them into the box on the right-hand side. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Tanya. Go ahead, Tanya.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. That's wonderful. It's a great first step. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is overcoming this big hump of being a rookie or feeling that you're a rookie in these circumstances. Just give me 1 second here. I'm sorry, Nathan, I'm having a problem to change over. Have I got control? There we go. All right, thank you. So, getting over the rookie hump. I just want to ask a question first. How many of you would this be a first foray into doing presenting at conferences or even in-house presentations? Feel free to put your answers on the side. I just want people to see how many people are new at this so that we can all feel a little more comfortable and know that we're not alone. I think that it's more common than you're really aware of. Done tons. Yeah, Jennifer, I would expect. But I think that a lot of us get really scared because we assume that the people that are doing these things have got a lot more experience than we do. And I'd like to talk to that. First of all, you have countless hours of practical hands-on experience, and you're just not applying it to this kind of format yet. You know how far you've come. Think about that first day that you were teaching in the class. I bet you wouldn't want to go back and do that lesson exactly the same way again. And you've probably already shared a technique, strategy, hint, whatever you want to call it, with a coworker. Congratulations. You were micro mentoring at the very least already. So really, this isn't your first foray probably into mentoring. You've probably helped out other people before. You just didn't call it mentoring. So let's get over that hump. It's not a rookie thing. Let's go. My experiences, I was asked to talk to the fact that I came from the private sector rather than the public sector, which can be different. Just from the networking and the different feedback you get from coworkers and how often you see them and how often you get to do Pro D together. In my particular case, I didn't get to do a lot of that. So it kind of came about more from my own. My coworkers asked me for advice, the same as they've probably done to you. I gave what I had. They came back to me. They told me that it really worked. They thanked me for it. I started to value a little bit that I had something there. My boss noticed, and when she noticed, she decided to start putting me in charge of mentoring new teachers coming in, which was great. And I could help them with the troubleshooting and avoiding pitfalls. That led to me doing an in-house presentation on pronunciation which actually I tweaked for a while, worked on again, did another in-house in my college presentation with a small group. And after I tweaked it enough, I put together my proposal, and my first presentation was at a Victoria regional conference. That's how I started. So I really do recommend, if you can, if you have that great opportunity, start small, in-house. It could be one-to-one, and then you build from there. Going on, finding contributing to your professional development. We need your classroom experience. Everybody needs it. We want hands-on, tried, tested things, strategies, techniques that we know works. And you have that because you've had countless hours in the classroom and you know what works and what doesn't work. Teachers want to hear about the practical classroom activities. Your failures are also valuable. Let's be honest. Pitfalls, how to avoid them. These things are also very, very valuable. And if we can set people up for success that have less experience than you, you are contributing, you are mentoring, even if you don't realize it. Moving on, you can also become an advocate, like I have, I guess, unknowingly, for pronunciation. In my case, I've been advocating teaching it more, addressing it more, paying attention to it more. And that's given me a really strong voice, and it's also helped me to define my niche. So basically, I'm going to say to you, congratulations, you're not a rookie. You've got lots to give us. Please, please, please don't think that way. And the biggest thing I found was deciding on your delivery style. There's a lot to consider here. You have to consider the topic and your method of delivery that's best suited to that topic. For example, some topics would not be suited to a poster session. They might be better suited to a lecture. We'll talk more about why in a minute. So we have to really consider all the different options that are available. Things I think that we need to consider: the scope of your presentation, how that's going to affect the amount of time that you need. Consider your comfort level with one-to-one interactions as opposed to small group or larger group or a lecture hall full of people. If you're not comfortable with those huge groups, you might want to consider something smaller. And consider presenting collaboratively. That's something I didn't even think of when I first made my first forays into this, but collaborative presentations could also maybe allay some of your fears or nervousness. You know, we always work better together. So these are the types of presentations that I was trying to think of, and a bit of the things that we need to consider for each one, because they all have their own particular nuances. A poster presentation, for example, this is really great because it gives you an opportunity to have more one-to-one interaction with people. And you might be more comfortable having one-on-one conversations with people rather than in really large groups. You can get immediate feedback, which is also fantastic, rather than after the conference or after the lecture. It's relatively low pressure due to the audience size, and it is best served by being very visual. But that also means that, and this is just logistics, transportation can be a challenge with large poster presentations, especially if you're in BC where it rains. So remember that. You have to bring this thing in and bring it out. I know it sounds like a tiny detail, but really it's pretty big. The next one, workshops. Generally, they're smaller, and they can be conducted by people that have hands-on experience. That's what most people are looking for when they say they want to go to a workshop. So they want less presenter talk time, more audience participation, and more engagement with the topic. It can be presented as a group or solo. Any of these really can. Workshop is often more popular or very popular because the practicality of the learning. you're trying out these tested techniques hands-on. You're interacting with other people, other colleagues. It's a really interactive and fun experience for a lot of people. But that does mean probably less talk time on your half and much more on theirs. Moving on to the round table. Smaller groups generally, and I don't know if many people know about round tables. It's maybe one of the lesser talked about ones, but I really enjoyed doing it because it promotes equal participation from all of the participants, and it has a more organic format. A roundtable presentation can start with just a question or a series of questions that you want to build on. So it can be less formatted, and it gives you an ability to share your techniques, successful, otherwise, and get immediate feedback from other people. The other thing that I really like about roundtables is that they often seem to happen at the end of a conference, which kind of allows you to consolidate all that wonderful learning that took place, share some of that learning, interact with other people, and maybe that can become a springboard for an idea that you had about a future presentation. So roundtables are a very intriguing and interesting thing, and maybe less respected than they should be. Just an opinion. Panel presentations allows for a very diverse range of professional experience. So, for example, if you wanted to have a grammar expert referring to a listening expert, referring to a pronunciation expert, and they can connect, this is great. This is really great. It allows for each participant to tailor their part based on their experience, their expertise, or their niche, as you might want to call it. Essential part to that, it requires a really good moderator to keep things on track and moving in the direction that you're hoping to go. Timing and equal speaking time can be a challenge, and it needs to be considered, and try to work it out in advance. Of course, the best laid plans, but more presentation practice, of course, is always best. And finally, the lecture. It's great for exploring research. The presenter, though, has a very high level of talk time, which some people might be uncomfortable with. Again, all of these really can be done collaboratively or solo. Lectures allow more time to explore a topic, go deeper into research, theories, all kinds of wonderful things. You also have to be prepared for a Q&A at the end, which can be daunting for sure, because you don't know where the questions are coming from, what angle, what perspective. But my experiences told me that generally the audience questions are very kind. They're not trying to throw you off or attack you. And it's only 10 or 15 minutes usually at the very end. So again, not the biggest thing, depending on how you schedule it. Just to give you an idea, because I was talking about the scope and the size and drawing attention. One of the reasons I chose this particular slide was because it caught my attention. It had lots of colors. It was very simple. It wasn't overwhelming in information. If I were a new teacher going to a conference, I might think this is a really friendly poster presentation and be a little bit, oh, I want to engage with that. I want to get closer. Plus, I can stand a little bit, honestly, far away and still get the main ideas. And then if I'm interested, I can go further in, but I can get the person's attention that might not be standing right there, or if there's a crowd in front of me. So I just wanted to use this as an example. It's also a great example of how are you going to transport it. It's something to really, really consider. So out of all of these choices, as I mentioned before, we've got lots of different styles, but what you need to do, of course, is consider the first things I said: scope, timing. Is it the best for this type of presentation? And your comfort level is key, especially when you're first starting out. So with that in mind, I'd like to show you one more slide, and I'm going to get Jennifer to talk to this one. This is Jennifer's previous example of a poster presentation. Jennifer, could you explain this one a little more?
Certainly. So this is it's a sample poster presentation, and it's representative of a research project that I was involved in between the UBC Library and Vantage College, where I'm teaching. And we were looking at developing some online resources for second language users in accessing the library and unpacking some of the language pieces behind it. And then once a year, UBC has its Celebrate Learning Symposium, and some of us do lectures, but they tend to be an hour or plus long. And then we also have this sort of open space of poster presentations, and this is one that my colleagues prepared. I wasn't involved in the preparation of the poster itself, but of the poster so that people can mill about. And as you indicated earlier, Tanya, that they can decide if they want to ask questions about it. They can get a sense of it on their own and sort of engage with it in slightly different ways. We have a capstone conference for our first year students, and we have them decide whether they want to do a poster presentation or an oral presentation with PowerPoint. And it's really interesting to see that a lot of the students choose the poster because they feel that they might not have to talk quite as much. And then they're really shocked to realize how much they do speak with people, but it's on a much more one-on-one basis. So you were speaking earlier about the aspect of comfort level and such. And so with this, you can lay it all out. And if you need to step away or come back in, you can do that. People can engage with it a little bit more on their own terms and at their own pace. Whereas with the an oral presentation, as you were saying earlier, it's a bit more directed by the presenter itself. All right. So I'm going to jump in then and sort of, I think Tanya's made a good case for why one should present, and then there's the logistics of how to do it. And so I want to speak to that a little bit in terms of the planning of what you might do. And so these are some of the different tags, the audience tags for the BC TEAL conference that we use in terms of who might the audience be. And I think this is a really important consideration to make. It's important, but it doesn't need to define exactly what you're doing. So what you might do is that, taking the advice that Tanya has given in terms of what's available or what you're thinking of doing, and then you might want to target that, but perhaps you could expand your scope just a little bit to include a couple more of some of these different community groups. So these are the ones that I've pulled out from the last conference that we had here at BC TEAL. But what all of these people typically have in common is that they are teachers, and you do need to keep that front of mind. Some conferences really have a focus on administration, some have a focus on assessment, and all are valid and fine. You'd want to keep that ultimate audience in mind, and you want to articulate it. If other people show up to your presentation, fantastic. They still have things to learn. But you want to articulate for yourself and for your audience who you have in mind for this. And then you want to articulate why they should attend your session. What is it that you are planning on offering? What is it that are your goals for the session? And articulate that as clearly as possible. So some of the things to keep in mind, and I really advocate just in my lesson planning, as for my presentation planning, is your backwards design. Ultimately, what are the session outcomes? What are the goals that you have in mind? So taking all that Tanya's talked about in terms of you had this experience or you've got a great lesson, I think it needs to be more than just sharing the lesson. Are you going to be exploring some of the finer points of how it worked or how you might want to tweak it? I really liked how Tanya was talking about this idea of, tweaking it in an ongoing process, perhaps in a lower stakes audience, and then, when it's ready for the larger world to take it out to a conference presentation. And I agree, and I sympathize with that, certainly. But it might also be worth considering opening it up even further, that I've done this, but maybe there's more that I want to do with it, and maybe I can open it up even further. So think about what is the ultimate purpose and the goal and the outcome of your session, and try to articulate that. And I find that really helpful in focusing my goals. So some of the things that you want to do, or you might want to do, is think about, am I looking to interact with a new resource? Are you looking to share particularly strong examples? If you've really rocked something and it's really innovative and it's a giant show and tell, that's fine. Or maybe it's particular strategies. It's not that people will go away with a particular handout, maybe they will, But maybe it's a strategy, or maybe it's an approach, or maybe it's an insight that you want to work with and explore to either demonstrate or explore with the participants in the session. Something else that you might consider, are you looking to connect some theory to practice? Tanya was speaking a little bit earlier about the idea of giving a lecture. And I think we often are a little bit shy of that teacher talk, but I think there's also been a general movement in the larger EAL field to not work just with intuition and particular, personal examples. And while they have their role, I think we're doing more and more to professionalize our profession and also to connect our practices with research that's going on. And so I have a soft spot for it, I readily admit, but I do want to think about making those connections and the larger connections in the classroom, but also in the research field, and bolstering one another. There's been a lot of talk about how research is maybe disconnected or just divorced from the classroom, and there's a lot of good work being produced, and I think that a fair bit can be done to connect the two of them and make it that much more rigorous. And another perfectly legitimate session outcome would be to think about just networking and building community. Teaching's tough work. It's demanding, it's rigorous, it's emotionally demanding. And I think what you might want to do is think about what we can do as a profession, as individual participants in this profession, in building that community and in networking. I don't just mean networking in terms of seeking out future employment, although that has been rather effective in times past. If someone gives a really good presentation, they do tend to get their resume to the top of the pile. But further, about the resource sharing, the connections that are made. I had somebody come up to me after I presented on a panel at a couple of TEAL conferences ago, who came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, this reminds me so much of my master's research," and we've connected, and he's now joined our faculty. And I didn't know who he was previous, but that connection that was made over the content of the conference can be really inspiring. And even if it's not just in the professional looking for another job context, we can't keep on top of everything all the time. So if somebody else is somewhat curating and saying, "Oh, you're presenting on this, you should be in touch with this person," or "Here's an interesting resource." And sometimes that community is purely follow up through email. I found it incredibly validating, stimulating, all sorts of good things that I've really, really valued, both as a presenter and as a participant, to hear what people are doing in other contexts, in other teaching contexts, in other research contexts, and then to come home from a conference inspired, and then to follow up. Something else to consider is the time limitation. You can't be expected to give a really comprehensive overview of everything it is that you're doing. And so I think you can think about the conference presentation as a taste, as a touch on. And if people are further interested in it, they'll get in touch, and you may have an opportunity to collaborate on a project in future, or do another session where you've opened it up. Separate from BC TEAL, I'm participating in another professional community, and I've noticed this is happening both at the provincial and the national level, where they're mandating that people present from 2 different institutions. And so if you're going to submit a proposal, you need to submit a joint proposal with people from 2 different institutions. And that's been really interesting to witness, this discursive conversation that's going on between 2 people who share a topic or share an interest, and how they approach it in their context and somebody else approaches it in another context, and that opens it up even further. So these are some of the things to think about in terms of this opportunity to develop community. Something else that we might consider is using the conference theme as a springboard. So our upcoming conference for BC TEAL is this idea of space and pedagogy. And I love the futuristic font that they've chosen here. But when you think about, what does this have to do with what I'm doing? You may already have something ready to go. Or you may think, I need to do this. I need a bit of innovation and inspiration in the professional work that I'm doing. How can I use this essentially as a prompt? And we do this with our students all the time. Write about this idea, or here's a couple of little bits, make it into something. And I think that the conference themes can be really good fodder for that. So I was looking at this space and pedagogy because I don't have a new conference topic planned yet, but thinking about it. A little task-based learning, if you will. So one thing to think in this context is the idea of the impact of physical space on pedagogy. So it's hosted at Vantage, so I went around and I took photos of some of the different classrooms that we have at Vantage. And you'll notice here in the pictures on the right-hand side that we've got really different classroom layouts. And I'm teaching in the classroom in the upper right-hand corner, and I'm doing a lot of group work. And I'm thinking, how can I bribe my colleagues who have got the bottom right layout or the upper left layout? Because I want my students working together in groups. When they have to move the tables and chairs around, it really does impact my pedagogy. It's difficult for me to float around the classroom. They tend to be lined up side to side rather than facing one another and interacting in a slightly different way. Last year, I taught in a classroom that had these immovable tables, but these big spaces, and students could spread all of their stuff out. These things impact how we teach. As an undergrad, I had a bunch of these not nearly as comfortable chairs, but these little flip down tiny little tables, I really didn't like them. It didn't leave me any room for my textbooks, my dictionary, all of the stuff that I wanted to spread out. So this is a simple, if you will, but thinking about how does my physical space impact my pedagogy? Some other considerations to think about is in other contexts, if you're teaching across large spaces and time, so maybe out in rural communities or maybe in an asynchronous online classroom, what are the impacts of having that kind of space and the impact on your pedagogy or planning? Something else that you might think about in this response to the idea of space and pedagogy is how do we make space for thinking, make space for reflecting, either as instructors who often feel so frantically busy. How are we carving out that time to read, to think, to develop and reflect? Or how are we making time for our students in the classroom to think? There's been some tweets recently from Scott Douglas talking about leaving a little bit of time for students to think and compose their response to a question, and not just that the first extroverted student be the first one to jump in, but how can we create other spaces for students who perform in different ways to still engage and participate in our classes? How can we make space for new instructors in our profession? How can we mentor them? How can we fit everybody in and the learning and the support that needs to happen? Something else to think about is your own outcomes. So I've talked a little bit about the session outcomes, but what about for you and yourself? And I go back to one of my favorite quotes that I use in the preface of my master's research, and the idea that reading maketh a full man or woman, conference makes you ready, and writing makes you precise. So lots of us have all this reading and all these ideas, but that conference aspect makes you consolidate it. And I really do think with the idea of backwards design and outcomes first, okay, how am I going to present this and share this? So think about those outcomes for yourself. Are you looking to showcase your work? And that is fine. A lot of conference presentations are show and tell. That's fine. But are you looking to get feedback on something? Is something a work in progress? I presented at BC TEAL and at TESOL Canada in the spring, and it was something brand new. It was a new lesson. It really blew my mind when I realized this thing. I brought in another colleague who was working in a completely different discipline. We're talking poli-sci and physics. But then we had this discussion going back and forth, and we took notes because the input and the questions from the audience made us think about it a little bit more. We're trying to work on a paper, and one of the things you want to think about the paper is what are the questions that people are going to have? And if we get that input from the audience, then we can address it not only in future conference presentations, but perhaps in a paper as well. We have a lot of discussion around the co-construction of knowledge, and different people bring different backgrounds, different theories, different understanding, different experiences. And so can they bring something to your presentation or your panel or your project or your problem and really have this iterative discussion around what it is that you're working at? I'd really love to see people bringing a question to a conference presentation. It's not that I have an answer and I've got this polished presentation. I've got this dilemma or I've got this question and I really want this input from other people. Those can be tremendously formative and exciting. Are you looking to start a new initiative? We've had TEAL panels and discussions around standards, around different projects. There's a lot of community here. Who's doing what, and bring that in. And often those conference presentations gives you an opportunity to really consolidate your understanding. They force you in a way to do that. And I've found them really, really valuable to do, to consolidate and pull it all together. So then you need to get it ready for the conference proposal. And it is a written submission. They are reviewed blind. I've participated, I've submitted, I've been accepted, I've been rejected, and I've reviewed conference proposals and typically learn something every time. So there are instructions, and teachers are notorious at following instructions. So if I can give one really concrete piece of advice is follow the instructions. Also get into a little bit beyond description. Get into the discussion of the relevance. Explain. Don't just describe what you're going to do, but maybe explain how and why it's relevant. What is the risk if people don't get into this level of analysis or type of activity? I do think it's important to contextualize the environment in which you've done this kind of work before. And that isn't to discount where else it might be appropriate. You can open it up also in that discussion of the relevance. Talk about where you're doing this or situating yourself, what you're doing, and then extend it to other potential applications and potential contexts. You might even consider, this is where I'm doing, and I'd like to explore how and where this might be useful or applicable in other contexts. I think you should also consider your stance. Are you looking to be critical? Are you looking to problematize or trouble certain things? Not everybody's comfortable with that. Some are really excited by that. And I think it's important to consider it for yourself and articulate it for people who might be interested in exploring that with you. Also, make sure that you are clear and focused. So people are reading this. And as we often say to our students, we can only read what's on the page. We can't read what's in your mind. So you need to make sure that you really articulate what it is that you need to say and want and share it. Take the advice that we give to our students. Do a practice run of even the proposal. So I'm thinking of submitting this. How does this look? Tanya was talking earlier about doing the smaller in-house ones and then taking it to a slightly larger audience. So if you've had the opportunity to have somebody witness your presentation and have them participate in it with you, they may have that much more insight onto what they gleaned or what they saw as the value added as your presentation. Consider that feedback and consider including it in that presentation. And then make your writing of the proposal as clear and as focused as possible. This is specific to BC TEAL, but a lot of other conferences have a clearly published rubric as to how they're going to be assessing those conference presentations. I downloaded this one from the BC TEAL website. I'm not sure if this is the most recent one that they're using, But I've found it useful to, again, work backwards. What are they looking for, and how can I best address them? So a title, it seems simple enough, but it does need to catch the attention. And with my academic writing students, I often say that title gives you guidance. It's really useful as a reader. Do I want to read this article or not when I'm scanning through things in the library? But also as a presenter and as a writer, is this really what I'm talking about? The last presentation I gave at BC TEAL was talking about conditionals and context. And that's how we sort of really focus the contextualization of this particular grammatical form, or a form previously known as a grammatical form, but actually much bigger and messier than that. And that was the context of what we were talking about in response to looking at conditionals and context. But I've since done a whole bunch of other reading, and I'm realizing that conditionals are a concept that may not be represented by if. There's a whole circumstance of contingency around them. This has really, really opened my mind. And so going from the conference title to now a paper title, I'm really talking about conditionals as a concept. And that, having that as my working title, really helps me make sure that I keep my focus and my thread all the way through. Get those objectives out there. We do these with lesson plans. Make sure that they're clear, that they're relevant to the conference. If this isn't an academic conference, you don't want academic objectives. If this is I've retweaked the same conference presentations for a couple of different sessions. If this is an international education where there may not be a lot of language teachers, I'm taking a much more cultural perspective. But if it's for language teachers, I got to get the language in there. And so think about those objectives in terms of the audience. And is it relevant? Is it relevant to the target audience? And is it relevant to the conference overall? A currency thing is whether this is really new or if it's really overhashed and done. I don't think that it necessarily needs to be new and innovative all the time. There needs to be time and space to revisit, to re-explore the different topics that are going on. You know, a lot of talk that's going on in the larger EAL field about the native speaker-ism and the value added of non-native speaker instructors. I think that's a really big theme and a topic. We can't rely on these old constructs and just assume and go from there. You need to acknowledge the larger conversations that are going. A little bit of background research is really, really important. But we also don't need to always go new. And we need to think about the larger community of our profession. We've always got new teachers joining us. Make sure that we cover some of these things. And you can target this as a revisit for noobs. And I'll still show up because we always have things to learn from revisiting certain things. Your presentation needs to be organized. If it's haphazard or really not clear or disorganized, chances are that your presentation may be that way as well. And in terms of clarity, we're language teachers. We tend to look at these sorts of things. Choose your words carefully. Make sure that they're spelled properly. These things really do have a currency and an appropriateness there. So different conferences have different requirements, different specifications. I've submitted things that require a 50-word description and a 300-word description. And even if it's the same presentation, it can be really difficult and different to talk about these different things. But the process of doing it, I find it personally, professionally, really beneficial to think through these different things. So that's essentially the end of my spiel. I may have talked too quickly, but I'm not teaching my students today. I'm presenting to colleagues. So I do apologize if I've gone too quickly. But I think at this point, we're at the 20 minute mark. And I think we were hoping to open up the last 20 minutes for questions and answers. So thank you for the comment. I've been sort of following in the sidebar, but I will do my best to either type or think or respond and do all of that.
Well, first off, thank you very much to both of you, Tanya and Jennifer. That's great. And yeah, there's a lot packed into that. So now we have a chance to be able to unpack that a little bit. So we do have some time. We actually have tried to specifically set aside some time for you to be able to, as people who are visiting, to be able to ask some questions and open this up as more of a discussion type of thing. So please, if you have any questions or any comments about successes, or maybe even, shall we say, not so successful applications, proposals, please share them.
You don't want the dirty laundry stories, do you?
I think we've all had a proposal somewhere along the line that hasn't been accepted, and yeah, it's a little disheartening at times, but especially with the amount of time and effort you put into some of these. But yeah, you just can't undervalue the opportunity to be able to even just write the proposal is enough sometimes, like you were saying, and having to be succinct about what you believe and what you want to talk about. And even if you don't get accepted, I think that's a valuable process to go through. So that was a good point.
Would you like me to speak to this bit about a presentation having been turned down?
Please.
Okay. First of all, be kind on yourself. Thank you for submitting. Not every proposal can be submitted. If you've ever been on a hiring committee, not everybody can be hired, despite the qualifications. Sometimes it's simply a matter of fit. This looks like an interesting session, but it's not really representative of our audience. I think that we don't tend, I think different institutions, different communities have different practices, whether they give feedback or not. If you get feedback, or if your proposal is turned down, I don't think that BC TEAL has a policy or has a practice of offering feedback per se, but I don't think that ever really hurts to ask. And this could also be another way of developing that community and indicating a dedication. I'd like to do this. I really think that there is value in the work that I'm doing. How can I better present it? I mean, I had a proposal rejected and I'd already published the article in a peer-reviewed journal. The issue was with the conference presentation, not with the quality and the quantity of the material. It happens. I just posted in the sidebar here, I once got 6 pages of feedback warning me not to do damage to a community. You do need to be careful if you really are looking for feedback or not. And the proposal was accepted, but still with that warning. So just consider that these are peers who are doing the reviewing. They are peers who may be involved in that particular sector, who may not be involved in the particular sector. What I can say for BC TEAL's practices is that they are blind. I've been reviewed. There's been that warning. Please make sure if you get your own conference proposal, don't review it, because they're literally that blind. And if there's any big discrepancy between someone gives it a high score and somebody gives it a low score, then we do some calibration and we do some discussion. So do trust that it's not wanton dismissal, that it's not because you didn't hire somebody else at another time. These really are blind reviews and they are against the rubric. I think it's okay to go in and ask. And if you don't get the feedback from the organization, go to your colleagues and say, what else do you think I can be doing? It's a big ask, but I think that it is important to do.
And I can say in regards to that, like this last conference we had, a lot of the proposals were triple blind review. So yeah, it is blind, and we do try and make sure that if we do have those discrepancies, we bring a third person in, and then if that still has some discrepancies, then the discussion amongst everybody. So.
And just on a side note, kind of, I found it humorous. I heard that a keynote speaker was denied to present at the conference. But it can happen by accident too. There's all kinds of weird things going on that we can't control. Perhaps it doesn't fit in with the theme perfectly. Maybe somebody else gave one that was just a little more focused on the theme than you, or seemed that way. There's a lot of things going on that we don't know about. So like Jennifer said, trying to get feedback whenever possible is great. However possible. If it has to be your colleagues, great. And if the actual place that you apply to present at gives you feedback, again, think about it as growth, because that's really all it is. It's never rock,
one of
paper,
the things I
scissors.
would like to add kind of a mention about in talking about the smaller kind of session things, and that is with BC TEAL, we've been in the last 2 conferences running the Ed Tech Jam. And so if you are maybe technologically, you don't want to do a poster presentation, but you have something that you can share in regards to technology, and it doesn't have to be really extensive. In fact, these Ed Tech Jams are usually about a 10 to 15 little minute presentation that you give multiple times. That would be a great opportunity. It doesn't take as much time and effort for you to be able to present, and it can be a lot more focused in regards to your proposal. They're usually much easier proposals in order to write as well. So if you're thinking of something like that, yeah, that's a great foot in the door, and it gets you a chance to kind of get the feel for what it's like to present to people, but it's not as intensive as trying to give a full presentation. So. Question from Brenda. If I feel what I'm offering is perhaps the same or similar to others have done before, how do I do up my innovation? How do I, do you have suggestions on how to put up a new spin on things? Do you want to take that?
Will Tanya speak to this?
Sure, actually. Putting a fresh spin on things has been something that I've dealt with a little bit. And what I really found was I had to look more deeply at why the conference was being held, what the goals of the whole conference were, and how I could maybe tweak it to better fit to that. So, for example, I had my chin, cheeks, lips presentation on pronunciation, and I did it in a couple of different conferences. And one of them was a smaller one that was, I'm sorry, I think a smaller one that was just focused on more intimate conversations, one-to-one things where I could really work with the people. And at the other one, there was less opportunity because the audience was a lot larger. And I found myself thinking that out ahead and tweaking it and catering it to that. And when I started that process, it started to lead me to the questions. So my audience has changed. How am I going to adapt? My amount of time has changed. How am I going to adapt? The place that it's being held in has changed. How am I going to adapt? So there was a lot of things even that don't seem like they need tweaking that can be to improve and make it better for that particular conference or presentation.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. The 2 other things that I would consider in response to this idea of innovation is think about your context or other contexts, and also making connections. So it may be that an idea is solid or it's valid, but maybe it can shift from one context to another. So I used to teach settlement-based English at the very, very beginner level, you know, LINC, when it was first LINC before ELSA, LINC level 1, immigrants and refugees, and now I'm teaching first-year university students. I'm still in the same profession, and some of those underlying principles still apply. They might manifest in different ways. And so whether it is in, you know, the private sector with international students who are here for general English, or this context or that context, it might be keeping the content core, but innovating in terms of the context and the application. The other thing that might also be worth thinking about is the idea of different connections, and that things aren't necessarily in silos. So I did a lesson today with my first-year students on morphology and vocabulary building, but I also wanted to incorporate a lot more of speaking practice, because our students, they're so focused on reading and writing, we're not getting a lot of speaking practice in. So I did some work on syllable stress and tied it into the morphology, because typically it isn't the prefixes and the suffixes that are stressed, it's the core, the root morpheme that carries the syllable stress, and research those, that's a lot of the impact of communicability is on the syllable stress. So that was the innovation of the lesson, was making those connections to the research, to the morphemes, but also the connections to the pronunciation and the morphemes. And so that can be, you know, sort of a discussion about how this idea might apply and how you connect it to some of the larger other contexts or the larger goals of the course. So innovating in terms of its applicability.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I found. I've actually been to conference sessions before that I didn't think were necessarily relevant to me, but it was because I knew the person, I was supporting them, so I thought I would come in, and I picked up actually quite a bit.
Yeah.
I remember one at Tesla, Ontario, and I went to the session, and I walked away thinking, wow, that was absolutely fantastic. And it was totally not in an area I was teaching in. It was on literacy, teaching literacy students in a settlement language, and I wasn't doing any of that.
Yeah.
And wow, I with tons of ideas. So you never know what's relevant. So that's why trying to write your proposals in that way so that it does bring in more people. So
Yeah. We talk about this as interdisciplinarity, looking at something in contrast. So how one discipline might look at something versus another discipline looks at it, makes you really challenge and think about how you've been doing it or assuming all this time. So I see another question here in the sidebar. Been to a really terrific session, and what made it awesome? I love it when somebody blows my mind. It's nice to be validated from time to time, but when you just go, oh my God, I've been doing it all wrong, or wow, I didn't think you could do it that way. I love that stuff. I'm not a fan of parroting. I've never been a fan of repeat after me, ever. And yet I was at a conference presentation with Jennifer Foote, who's I'm sorry, I'm on pronunciation today, but she talked about having the students parrot a section of a TED Talk for the larger intonation scales. And she had them do it and do it and do it on their own time until they were able to get the cadence just right in preparation for their oral presentations. And I was so excited about this idea, and I hadn't thought about it in that context before. So it was in combination of some technology and the cadence and the content and all of those sorts of things. I was really excited about that one.
And it's contagious.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tanya. Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say, when the presenters get really excited and they're really passionate, it's really contagious. And I find myself sitting up and I'm getting excited as well. And I'm just, and you don't notice the time passing. And yeah, geeking out is contagious, especially when it comes to pronunciation. But anything in the EL, yeah, you're going to get inspired. And the people that, yes, you're right, I should. The people, it's a little more challenging to get the grammar. But the people that I love watching usually were sharing something that they were really passionate about, and that is contagious. And even if you think I disagree with this person, if they're passionate about it, you're going to be passionately disagreeing in your head, at least. I hope not disrespectfully, but that's the kind of conference things that I always remember is the person that has passion, creativity, and maybe is looking at it from a perspective that I didn't see before. And that's really wonderful.
We had a question from Nellie, and I think, Jennifer, you already started addressing that, and it's just regarding the conference theme, space and pedagogy. So
Certainly. And I think, it's space and pedagogy. What does that mean? Are we talking about the final frontier? Let me say, if anybody puts out a Star Trek presentation, I am there. Star Trek was so formative for my intercultural perspective and understanding. Okay, maybe we're geeking out a little bit too much, but I did have to say that. But I was talking about that a little bit earlier because I'm looking at the conference theme and thinking, okay, what can I do with this idea of space and pedagogy? And so, no, not Doctor Who. So I was thinking, well, where could I go with that sort of thing? So how does your physical space impact where you're working? Is it, how accessible is it to people? Are you... accessibility really is an issue. Is there childcare provided, or what time is it that people can participate? I used to teach a morning class and then the same class in the evening, but because of the time, teaching ESL to people who've worked a whole day, grabbed dinner, and then came to your class, you pitch the lesson completely differently than you do to somebody who's got all, the morning. So that might be a consideration. Your physical space. I talked a little bit about whether it's asynchronous, if it's online or if it's face-to-face, and what are some of the implications. This is essentially a presentation today, but it's being done online. It's synchronous, but then it's going to be archived. And will that represent all of the back and forth that happened? So these are some of the considerations for space. Yeah, I think go with it and start thinking about it now and really dig into a little bit, or look into the research, see what it says.
Yeah, and Emma, really good comment about the session. Feeling awesome is when a confidence grows. So again, this validation, like you were talking earlier about, sometimes it's great to be validated and stuff. And I think it actually is. I think sometimes you're not quite sure if you've been doing it well, and then you walk into a session and you hear somebody who you respect, or somebody you know, and then you're like, oh, they also do the same thing. Because I think we are very siloed when we're teaching, and we forget to talk with one another and just share, and because we're too scared to. We're going to be going to laugh or say, why are you doing this way? And it's nice to hear that sometimes. So good comment from Emma.
Yeah. I think also that, teachers as a group of people, we're often really accustomed to assessment, and we can be a tough audience. So I think that we need that validation. I think that we need to think, you know what, I just might have something. And it does take a bit to put yourself out there.
It does.
But I also had comments from a colleague who frankly didn't last in the profession very long. We're friends, but we're no longer colleagues. And he was gobsmacked at how hard it was to convince other people to speak another language. He couldn't get over that some of us did it and enjoyed it. And I think if we can do that, if we can convince people to communicate and live and grow in another language, I think we can share some of what we've learned to our colleagues who share one.
Yeah, good. We're basically at the end of our time here. So unless there's something really, somebody really wants to throw out there, I had some comments about student panels. Yeah, actually we had one, the Lower Mainland Regional Conference a few years ago in Vancouver. We had that one where we had the student panels. I don't know, were you there for that one, Jennifer or Tanya? It was downtown, and we had about 4 or 5 students in that. It was wonderful. It's a fantastic panel. So yeah, I mean, that's certainly something you can think about. To close things up, just a couple of things. Just want to throw this out there. For those who signed up for the mentorship, Brenda will be in contact with you very soon, as she says. So yes, check your email. We're very excited about this opportunity to offer this to our membership, and we hope that it will grow into something that we can help people with. So yeah, thank you everybody for taking time out on a Thursday evening. Thank you, Jennifer and Tanya. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate it, and it was a very good presentation. I love the back and forth a little bit, so that's really nice to have. So thank you again. And for anybody who's looking for the recording on this, want to share it, we'll be posting on the BC TEAL blog. That's blog.bcteal.com. And yeah, thank you. Everybody have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording.